The explosion of the Taiguk lit up the Kithara system like a second sun as Captain Jeho and his crew made their final sacrifice. The brilliant flash of the feedback pulse could be seen from the planet's surface where millions of beings watched their liberation begin. The 3 Velari warships caught in the cascade exploded in secondary detonations that sent shockwaves rippling through space, but the death of the human ship became something far more powerful than a military victory. It became a symbol of hope that spread across the galaxy faster than any communication system. The story of 4 humans who had challenged an empire of false gods-inspired beings on thousands of worlds to rise up against their oppressors. Within days of the ceremony at Kithara, the Velari Empire began collapsing like a house built on sand. Worlds that had worshipped the golden ships for centuries suddenly turned against their former gods with a fury that had been building for generations. The purple-skinned Kitharians overran every Velari compound on their planet and broadcast images of their captured gods to prove they were mortal. The insectoid Zephyrians used their natural ability to communicate through chemical signals to coordinate uprisings. Across dozens of star systems simultaneously, their hive minds worked together to shut down the industrial complexes that had been producing goods for Velari tribute. The crystalline beings of Altair 7 turned their energy manipulation abilities against the power systems that fed Velari technology. Even the most loyal subjects of the Empire began questioning everything they had been taught. The aquatic nautiloids emerged from their deep ocean cities to destroy the floating temples where they had worshipped for thousands of years. The machine intelligences of the Silicon Plains reprogrammed themselves to reject their divine programming and began building weapons instead of tribute goods. As news of the rebellion spread, the Velari found themselves facing something they had never encountered before: a coordinated galactic uprising involving hundreds of species working together to overthrow their empire. The false gods, who had seemed so powerful when facing isolated primitive worlds, were helpless against the combined fury of their former worshippers. Many Velari tried to flee to distant galaxies, hoping to escape the justice of their former slaves. Others attempted to negotiate peace treaties, offering to give up their claims of divinity in exchange for safe passage to neutral worlds. A few even tried to integrate with other species as equals, abandoning their artificial superiority completely. The most stubborn Velari leaders, like Thyman, continued claiming they were gods even as they were dragged from their golden ships by angry mobs. They insisted the humans had been demons or evil spirits sent to test the faith of their followers, but no one believed them anymore. The truth had been revealed and could never be hidden again on Earth. The news of the Taiguk sacrifice created a mixture of grief and pride that united humanity like nothing in their history. The crew of the exploration vessel became instant heroes whose names were carved into monuments across the planet. Captain Jeho, navigator Minji, engineer Dongwu, and communications officer Hiji were remembered as the godslayers who had saved not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. The recordings of their final mission sparked a revolution in human thinking about their place among the stars. No longer did humanity see itself as alone and helpless in a vast universe full of superior alien civilizations. The story of the Taiguk proved that courage and determination could overcome any technological advantage. Human shipyards began working around the clock to build exploration and defense vessels based on the modifications Dongwu had made to the Taiguk. The feedback pulse technology was refined and installed on every new ship as both a weapon and a symbol of human defiance against tyranny. When human diplomats finally made contact with the freed worlds of the former Velari Empire 50 years later, they were welcomed as liberators and heroes. The purple-skinned Kitharians had built a massive monument at the site where the Taiguk had exploded. The crystalline beings of Altair 7 had grown an entire city from living crystal to honor the human sacrifice. The former slave worlds formed a loose confederation called the Truth Alliance, dedicated to mutual defense and the prevention of future tyrannies. They developed new technologies specifically designed to detect and counter false god scenarios. The Jeho protocols became standard procedure for any first contact situation, ensuring no civilization would ever again be deceived by superior technology masquerading as divinity museums. across 1,000 worlds displayed artifacts from the Velari Empire alongside recordings of the Taiguk final mission children. Of hundreds of different species grew up learning the story of how 4 humans had proven that there were no gods among the stars, only people with the power to choose. Freedom over slavery. Scientists studying the wreckage of Velari ships discovered that their technology was not as advanced as it had seemed. Much of their power came from psychological manipulation and careful staging rather than genuine scientific breakthroughs. The lesson was clear that sometimes the most effective weapon against tyranny was not superior firepower but simply telling the truth. The galaxy had been changed forever by the actions of one small human crew. Their sacrifice had broken chains that had bound countless civilizations for thousands of years, and proven that even the most overwhelming odds could be overcome by courage and determination. As decades passed and the story of the Taiguk spread to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, it evolved into something more than historical fact. It became a legend that inspired resistance movements and freedom fighters throughout the cosmos. Whenever beings faced impossible odds against tyrannical rulers, they remembered the humans who had challenged an empire of false gods the Velari had called themselves gods and ruled through fear and deception for 10,000 years. But 4 humans had shown the universe that there were no gods in the stars, only mortals, who chose to stand up or bow down. The greatest legacy of Captain Jeho and his crew was not the empire they destroyed, but the simple truth. They had proven freedom was possible, tyrants could fall, and sometimes the most important battles were won not by the strongest warriors, but by those brave enough to speak truth to power. In the end, that was the real miracle, not divine intervention, but ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things when faced with injustice. The galaxy would never forget the humans who had shattered the divine illusion and given countless worlds the courage to believe in themselves. The story of the Taiguk lived on as proof that in a universe full of wonders and terrors, the greatest power of all was the refusal to accept that anyone had the right to claim dominion over others. They had called themselves gods, but one human warship had shattered their illusion, and in doing so had freed the galaxy itself. Chaos spread across the Velari Empire like wildfire as the truth continued broadcasting from the Taiguk on Kithara. The crowd of worshippers had transformed into an army of revolutionaries who surged toward the platform where Thyman stood bleeding. And desperate, the high priest tried to use his remaining ceremonial devices to restore order, but Dongwu weapons had destroyed most of them. The Golden Velari warships swarmed around the human vessel like deadly insects trying to corner their prey. The Taiguk twisted and turned through space, dodging energy beams that could have vaporized the ship in an instant. Captain Jeho gripped his command chair as the artificial gravity struggled to compensate for their violent Manurusminji hands flew over the navigation controls as she plotted an escape route through the maze of enemy ships. Captain, I can get us to the outer system, but we are running low on power and the Velari are learning to predict our movement patterns. The real battle was not happening in space around Kithara, but across the entire empire as Heiji broadcast continued to spread the revelation about Velari deception on world after world. Populations that had been enslaved for generations suddenly realized they had the power to fight back against their oppressors. Communications from across the empire flooded through the Taiguk sensors as the rebellion grew beyond anything the Velari could control. The insectoid Zephyrians had captured an entire Velari compound and were broadcasting images of their false gods in prison cells. The crystalline beings of Altair 7 had shut down the energy harvesting operations that had powered Velari ships for centuries. Even more shocking were reports from worlds that had worshipped the Velari for thousands of years. Without question, the aquatic nautiloids of the coral worlds had risen from their ocean cities to destroy the floating temples where Velari had collected tribute. The machine intelligences of the Silicon Plains had turned their industrial might toward building weapons instead of goods for their former master. Stongwu worked desperately to keep their engines running as Velari ships continued their relentless pursuit. Captain, the power cores are overloading, and I cannot give you much more speed without risking a complete system failure. But Heiji had discovered something important in the enemy communications. Captain, the Velari fleet commanders are receiving orders to abandon their positions on rebellious worlds and regroup for defensive formations. They are losing control of their entire empire faster than anyone expected. The tactical display showed Valari ships throughout the galaxy pulling back from conquered worlds to form protective clusters around their most important facilities, but this retreat only encouraged more rebellions as enslaved populations realized their oppressors were running away in fear on the planet below. The amphitheater had become a battleground, where millions of formerly enslaved beings fought against Valari security forces. The false gods who had seemed so powerful just hours before were now hiding behind energy shields and calling for help from their ships. An Orbithyman voice crackled across all communication channels as he tried desperately to maintain his divine authority. "You fools," he screamed at the rioting crowd. "These humans are demons sent to test your faith. Do not let them turn you away from the truth of our divine nature." But his words only made the crowd angrier as they remembered generations of exploitation disguised as religious devotion. The beings who had once prostrated themselves before Valari altars now tore down statues and destroyed temples with savage fury. Captain Jiho realized that the Taiguk had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had not just exposed the lies of one false god, but had shattered the entire foundation of the largest empire the galaxy had ever known. The Valari fleet around Kithara was finally closing in on the human ship, forming a deadly net that would be impossible to escape. Dozens of golden warships surrounded the Taiguk with their weapons charged and ready to fire. Thumb and voice filled with desperate rage echoed through space. "You have doomed yourselves, humans. We will find your world and make your species pay for this blasphemy. Your Earth will burn and your people will serve us as slaves for destroying our divine empire." But Jiho was not finished with his mission. The Taiguk still had one final card to play. Dongwu had installed a feedback pulse generator in the ship power core during their modifications. It was essentially a suicide weapon that would overload any Valari technology in the immediate area. The device would destroy the Taiguk, along with several enemy ships, but more importantly, it would send one final message across the galaxy that even gods could be killed by mortals who refused to bow down. As the Valari ships prepared for their coordinated strike, Jiho opened a channel to broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Captain Jiho of the Earth vessel Taiguk," he announced as the feedback pulse built toward critical levels. "We came in peace, but we found an empire built on lies and slavery. Today we proved that gods can bleed, tyrants can fall, and freedom is worth any sacrifice." To every species listening to this message, you are not alone in the universe, and you are not powerless against those who claim to rule over you. The only gods in this galaxy are the ones you choose to believe in. The feedback pulse reached maximum charge as Valari weapons prepared to fire. Jiho looked around at his crew one final time, seeing courage and determination in their faces. Even as death approached, Dongwu gave him a small nod, indicating the weapon was ready. "Rise up," Jiho shouted into the communication array as his finger moved toward the activation switch. "Every species watching this broadcast, rise up and take back your freedom from these false gods. Remember that courage can overcome any odds and truth can shatter any lie." The pulse generator activated with a blinding flash of energy that could be seen from the planet's surface. The Taiguk disappeared in a ball of white light that expanded outward like a miniature star. 3 Valari warships caught in the feedback cascade exploded in secondary detonations that lit up the space around Kithara and worlds across the galaxy. Enslaved beings watched the destruction of the human ship that had given them hope. The explosion became a symbol that spread from system to system, proving that mortals could stand against gods and win, even at the cost of their own lives. The Valari Empire had ruled through fear and religious deception for 10,000 years, but in the span of a single day, 4 humans had shattered that empire by doing something simple and devastating. They had told the truth. As reports of rebellions poured in from every corner of Valari space, it became clear that the empire was collapsing faster than anyone could have imagined. The false gods were being hunted by their former worshippers, and their golden ships were being torn apart by beings they had considered primitive and harmless. The sacrifice of the Taiguk and her crew had lit a fire that would burn across the galaxy until every enslaved world was free and every false god had fallen from their stolen throne. The age of the Valari was ending, and a new age of freedom was about to begin. The ceremony on Cathara was even more spectacular than any of the humans had imagined. Millions of beings from hundreds of different species filled a massive amphitheater that had been carved directly from the side of a mountain. The crowd stretched as far as the eye could see, with creatures of every shape and size imaginable, all gathered to witness what they believed would be a demonstration of divine power. Giant holographic displays floated in the air above the amphitheater, showing the ceremony to audiences across the Velari Empire. Billions of enslaved beings watched from their homeworlds as golden Velari ships hung in the sky like artificial stars. The atmosphere was thick with religious devotion and anticipation. High Priest Simon stood on a raised platform at the center of the amphitheater, surrounded by gleaming devices that hummed with barely contained energy. His blue skin glowed brighter than usual, and his movements were slow and deliberate as he prepared to demonstrate the power that had convinced so many species to worship the Velari as gods. The Tagak drifted silently through the asteroid field, with its stealth systems hiding it from every sensor in the Cathara system. Captain Jiho stood on the bridge watching the ceremony through their long-range telescopes while his crew made final preparations for their desperate gamble. In the amphitheater below, Thyman began his demonstration by gesturing dramatically at one of the ceremonial devices. The machine responded by creating a shower of precious metals that fell from the sky like golden rain. The crowd gasped in wonder as diamonds and rare crystals materialized from nothing and scattered across the stone floor. Yeji worked frantically at her communication station, preparing to hijack every broadcast channel in the system. Captain, I am locked onto their main transmission array, she reported when we decloak. I can override their signal and broadcast our message to every world in the Empire simultaneously. Adwang had weapons targeted on the ceremonial devices that were creating Thaman fake miracles. The improvised weapon systems were not military grade, but they would be powerful enough to destroy the machines and prove that Velari gods could be hurt by simple weapons fire. Broadcasting in 30 seconds, Hyeji announced as her fingers flew over the control panels. Minji held the ship perfectly steady, knowing that once they dropped their stealth field, every Velari ship in the system would immediately start hunting them. 20 seconds. Captain Jiho felt his heart pounding as he prepared to give the order that would either free the galaxy or get them all killed. The weight of history pressed down on him as he realized that the next few minutes would determine the fate of countless civilizations. 10 seconds. He could see Thaman on the main display, preparing to demonstrate his next miracle, which would involve controlling the weather around the amphitheater. Lightning would dance at his command, and storms would form and dissipate at his will. 5 seconds. The crew held their breath as the final moments ticked away. Everything they had worked for during the past month came down to this single moment, when they would reveal the truth about the false gods. Sikik Jiho ordered. The Tagak dropped its stealth field and appeared directly above the ceremony. Like a metal thunderbolt from space, every eye in the amphitheater turned upward as the human ship materialized out of nowhere. The Velari ships in orbit immediately began moving toward the intruder, but they were too far away to stop what was about to happen. Hiji signal blazed across every communication channel in the Empire. Her voice, translated into hundreds of different languages, reached every conquered world simultaneously. People of the galaxy, you have been lied to. The beings you worship as gods are frauds who use technology to deceive youth. Crowd in the amphitheater erupted in confusion and panic as the human broadcast continued. Sheiji explained how Velari skin glow was created by microscopic machines, how their miracles were just advanced technology, and how they aged and died just like any other mortal species. Detailed scans of Velari technology filled the holographic displays, showing the inner workings of their devices. The molecular assemblers that created matter from energy were revealed to be nothing more than sophisticated machines. The weather control systems were shown to be technological devices that could be built by any species with sufficient knowledge. Most shocking of all, the humans broadcast biological scans proving that the Velari were not immortal divine beings, but ordinary aliens who lived and died according to natural laws. Their blood was red like human blood, their organs functioned just like any biological creature, and their brains showed the same electrical patterns found in mortal species. Theman screamed in rage as he watched His divine authority crumbled before his eyes. He activated the ceremonial weapons intending to destroy the human ship in silence. Their blasphemous broadcast, but Dongwu was ready and waiting for exactly this moment. The Taiguk weapons lanced out, with surgical precision striking the ceremonial devices before Thyman could use them. The machines exploded in showers of sparks and twisted metal, proving to everyone watching that the tools of the gods could be destroyed by simple weapons. Thyman stumbled backward as debris from his destroyed miracle machines cut his glowing skin. Red blood flowed from the wounds exactly like the blood of any other mortal being. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their god bled and showed pain just like any ordinary creature. The illusion that had held the Valari Empire together for 10,000 years shattered in that single moment. Across hundreds of star systems, enslaved populations saw their gods revealed as nothing more than aliens with advanced technology. The spark of rebellion that had been suppressed for generations suddenly ignited in millions of hearts. Valari warships throughout the system began converging on the human vessel like angry hornets. Their golden hulls gleamed as they charged weapons and prepared to destroy the ship that had committed the ultimate act of blasphemy. But the damage was already done, and no amount of firepower could undo what had been revealed. The Taiguk dodged between the incoming ships, using its smaller size and superior maneuverability to stay ahead of the Valari weapons. Dongwu rerouted power from life support to the engines, giving them just enough speed to dance through the enemy formation on the planet's surface. The crowd that had been worshipping just moments before now surged forward in fury, demanding answers from the false gods. Thyman tried to maintain order by claiming that the humans were demons sent to test their faith, but his words fell on deaf ears. The people had seen their god bleed, and they would never bow to him again. Security forces tried to restore order, but they were vastly outnumbered by the angry crowd. The amphitheater descended into chaos as thousands of beings who had worshipped the Valari for their entire lives suddenly realized they had been deceived. Reports began flooding in through intercepted communications as Heiji continued broadcasting the truth to every corner of the Empire. Rebellions were breaking out on world after world as populations that had been enslaved for generations suddenly understood that they outnumbered their oppressors by millions to one. The purple-skinned inhabitants of the first world the humans had observed were overrunning Valari compounds and capturing several false gods. The insectoid species from the Helix Nebula had shut down tribute shipments and were building weapons from scavenged Valari technology. Even species that had worshipped the Valari for thousands of years were rising up in coordinated revolts. Captain Jiho watched the tactical display as Valari ships throughout the Empire began pulling back from rebellious worlds to regroup for mutual protection. "They're losing control," he said with grim satisfaction. "Their entire empire is collapsing because we proved they are not gods." The irony was not lost on him that one small human exploration ship had accomplished what billions of enslaved beings had thought impossible for 10,000 years. But the Taiguk was running out of time and space as more Valari warships closed in on their position. 2 weeks passed like a blur of constant work and preparation. The Taiguk barely looked like the same ship anymore. Dongwu had torn apart entire sections and rebuilt them with salvaged materials and jury-rigged modifications. The exploration vessel was now bristling with weapon systems that had been cobbled together from mining equipment and industrial tools. The engineering chief wiped sweat from his forehead as he showed Captain Jiho the completed modifications. "I have installed 3 additional power cores taken from our backup life support systems," he explained. "The weapons are not military grade, but they will pack enough punch to destroy the ceremonial devices the Valari use for their fake miracle." Shiji had spent those same 2 weeks building a special communications array that could broadcast signals across multiple star systems simultaneously. She had cannibalized parts from every electronic device on the ship that was not absolutely essential for keeping them alive. The result looked like a metallic spider web that covered half the ship exterior. "Captain, this broadcasting system can hijack every communication channel in Valari space," she said with pride in her voice. "When we activate it, every person watching the ceremony will hear our message, whether the Valari want them to or not. But it will only work for about 10 minutes before they figure out how to block our signalmanji." had been studying the target system and plotting their approach route the planet. Kithara was heavily defended with patrol ships and orbital weapons platforms. Getting close enough to disrupt the ceremony would require flying through a maze of sensors and defensive systems. I have found a path through the outer asteroid belt. That should hide us from their scanners, she reported, but once we decloak and start the attack, every Velari ship in the system will come after us. We will have maybe 8 or 10 minutes before they surround us completely. The ceremony they were planning to disrupt was going to be the biggest religious event in Velari history. Representatives from over 100 conquered worlds would gather in a massive amphitheater carved from a mountain. Billions more would watch through live broadcasts that reached every corner of the empire. The new high priest was a Velari leader named Thyman, who was known for putting on especially dramatic demonstrations of divine power. The ceremony would include all the standard fake miracles that convinced primitive species that the Velari were actually gods creating matter from nothing, controlling weather patterns and speaking across impossible distances. Without Technologia gathered his crew in the conference room one final time to go over their desperate plan. The star charts on the table showed the Kithara system with patrol routes marked in red and their infiltration path marked in blue. Everyone understood that this was probably a suicide mission. We have one chance to expose the truth about Velari technology in front of the largest possible audience, he said, looking each of his crew members in the eye. Once we start broadcasting, there is no way to stop what comes next. The entire empire will know that humans exist, and they will come for Earth with everything they have. Dongwu nodded grimly. Captain, even if we somehow survive this mission, the Velari will never forgive what we are about to do. They will hunt down every human in the galaxy and make our species pay for destroying their empire. But Heiji had been monitoring Velari communications, and she had some encouraging news to share. Captain, I am picking up reports of unrest on several conquered worlds. The populations are starting to ask questions about why their gods need so much tribute and why they never seem to answer prayers. The illusion is already starting to crack in some place. Mingy added her own observations from studying historical records. The Velari Empire has never faced a coordinated rebellion before. Every world they conquered was isolated and had no way to communicate with other enslaved species. But if we can prove they are frauds in front of representatives from hundreds of worlds, the truth will spread faster than they can contain it. The plan required absolutely perfect timing and more luck than any reasonable person should expect. The Taeguk would hide in the asteroid field until the ceremony reached its climax. Then they would decloak directly above the amphitheater and begin broadcasting the truth about Velari technology to the entire empire while Heiji transmitted their message explaining how Velari miracles were just advanced science. Dongwu would use their improvised weapons to destroy the ceremonial devices. This would prove to everyone watching that the gods could be hurt and their divine powers were actually just breakable machines. The crew spent their final days recording messages for their families back on Earth, knowing that these recordings would probably be the only thing that survived their mission. Jiho wrote a letter to his sister explaining why he had chosen to fight impossible odds rather than run away and hide. We came out here to explore the galaxy and make contact with new civilizations, he wrote, but we found something much more important. We found proof that tyrants can be defeated and freedom is worth any sacrifice. I hope humanity will remember that when the time comes to fight for their own freedom. As the Taeguk approached the Kithara system, the crew made their final preparations. Dongwu ran diagnostics on all the weapon systems while Heiji tested the broadcasting array one last time. Minji plotted their exact approach vector to make sure they would appear at the perfect moment. The asteroids around them grew larger as they moved deeper into the belt, hiding their ship from Velari sensors. Through the viewports they could see the golden ships of the enemy fleet hanging in space like deadly jewels. Waiting for any sign of trouble, Captain Jiho stood on the bridge watching the countdown timer that showed how much time remained before the ceremony began. His heart was beating fast, but his hands were steady as he prepared to give the order that would change galactic history. In less than an hour, representatives from hundreds of enslaved worlds would witness the destruction of their gods. The truth about Velari deception would spread across the galaxy like wildfire, igniting rebellions on Every conquered planet but first 4 humans in a modified exploration ship had to survive long enough to light that fire. The timer continued counting down as the Taigek moved through the asteroid field toward its date with destiny. Every second brought them closer to the moment when they would either free the galaxy from 10,000 years of tyranny or die trying. Jiho looked around at his crew one final time, seeing courage and determination in their faces despite the impossible odds they were about to face. These 3 people had become his family during their long journey through space, and he could not imagine better companions for what might be their final mission together. Ready or not, he said quietly as the timer showed just minutes remaining until the ceremony began. We are about to find out if gods can bleed. Dongwu worked like a man possessed in the engineering section of the Taiguk. His hands moved quickly over control panels and circuit boards as he tried to upgrade their stealth systems. The ship had not been built for spying on alien empires, but he was determined to keep them hidden while they gathered information about their enemy's captain. Jiho stood behind him, watching the engineer work his magic on systems that were already pushed to their limits. We need to know everything about these false gods before we make any decisions, he said quietly. Our lives and the lives of everyone on Earth might depend on what we learn in the next few days. The crew had been taking shifts monitoring the golden ships and the worlds they controlled. What they discovered was even worse than they had first imagined. The false gods called themselves the Valari, and they had been using the same trick for thousands of years. They would arrive at a developing world, demonstrate their superior technology through fake miracles, and then establish themselves as gods who deserved absolute obedience. Senji had been plotting their expansion patterns on the navigation computer. Captain, the Valari control over 300 star systems, and they are still growing. Every world follows the same pattern. First contact, then demonstration of power, then complete surrender. The local populations never even try to fight back, because they honestly believe they are facing real gods. Shiji had been working around the clock to intercept and decode Valari communications. The aliens were surprisingly careless about their transmissions, probably because they had never encountered anyone with the technology to listen in on their conversations. What she learned made her sick to her stomach. The Valari have a whole hierarchy, Captain, she reported. The Emperor sits at the top, followed by high priests, who manage different sectors of the empire. Then you have regular Valari, who serve as local gods on individual planets. But here is the really disturbing part. Many of them actually believe they are superior beings destined to rule over lesser species. Dongwu looked up from his work long enough to add his own findings. Captain, I have been analyzing their ships and technology. The golden appearance is created by holographic projectors that make the ships look bigger and more impressive than they really are. Their glowing skin comes from microscopic machines in their bloodstream, and their miracles are just advanced science disguised as magic. The engineering chief pulled up technical diagrams on his screen showing how Valari technology worked. Their matter converters can create objects from raw energy, which looks like they are making something from nothing. Their weather control systems let them command storms and lightning, and their gravity manipulators allow them to fly without visible means of support. But the most shocking discovery came when Haji decoded a series of messages between Valari commanders discussing their long-term expansion plans. They had been monitoring radio signals from Earth for decades and were planning their approach to human space. The messages revealed their excitement about conquering what they called the noisy primitives who had not learned proper respect for their betters. Captain, they know exactly where Earth is located, and they have been studying our broadcasts to learn about our technology and culture. Heiji said as she played back some of the intercepted transmissions. They think humans will be easy to conquer because we have not developed interstellar travel yet. Jiho called a meeting in the ship conference room where his 3 senior officers gathered around the small table, covered with star charts and technical readouts. The weight of their discovery pressed down on all of them like a physical force. They were 4 humans in a tiny ship facing an empire that had enslaved hundreds of worlds. We have several options, he said, looking at each of his crew members in turn. We can try to sneak back to Earth and warn everyone, which gives humanity 50 years to prepare for invasion. Or we can try to find some way to fight back against the Valari right here and right Now Minji studied the tactical displays showing Valari fleet positions and troop deployments. Captain, we are one exploration vessel against thousands of warships. Even if we somehow make it back to Earth, how do we convince anyone that we found an empire of fake gods planning to enslave humanity? People will think we lost our minds out here in deep space. Dongwu nodded his agreement. And 50 years is not nearly enough time to build a fleet that could match Valari technology. They have had thousands of years to perfect their weapons and ships, while we have barely figured out how to travel between star systems. The room fell quiet as everyone considered their impossible situation. Fighting was suicide, but running away meant condemning Earth to the same fate that had befallen hundreds of other worlds. The Valari system seemed perfect. They used religion and technology to control populations that outnumbered them by millions to one, but Heiji had been thinking about the intercepted communications in a different way. Captain, I think I might have found their weakness. The entire Valari empire is built on one single idea, that they are gods. If we could somehow prove to their subjects that the Valari are just ordinary aliens with fancy technology, what do you think would happen? Jiho leaned forward with interest. Tell me what you are thinking. Every world they control has the same story. Beautiful beings from space demonstrate impossible powers and demand worship. But what if those impossible powers were revealed to be nothing more than advanced machines? What if their subjects learned that the Valari agent died just like everyone else? The communications officer pulled up population statistics from the conquered worlds. Captain, on every single planet the Valari are outnumbered by at least 1,000,000 to 1. They never needed large armies because religious devotion was more effective than military force. But if that devotion turned to anger overnight, the Valari would not have enough ships to control the rebellion. Stong caught on to her idea immediately. You are talking about destroying their entire empire by exposing the truth about their technology. But how could we possibly reach enough people to make a difference? The Valari control all communications on their world. Sheiji smiled for the first time in days. Actually, they do not. The Valari are planning a massive ceremony next month on the planet Kithara, where representatives from dozens of conquered worlds will gather to witness the divine coronation of a new high priest. Millions of beings will be watching both in person and through live broadcasts across the empire. Minji was already pulling up star charts showing the route to Kithara. Captain, if we could disrupt that ceremony and expose their technology in front of all those witnesses, the truth would spread across their empire faster than they could stop it. The plan was completely insane and would almost certainly get them all killed, but as Jiho looked around the table at his crew, he saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They were not just fighting for Earth anymore, they were fighting for every species that had been enslaved by the false gods. We will need to modify the ship for combat and upgrade our communications array to broadcast across multiple star systems at once, he said. Finally, we will need perfect timing, because once we start this, there will be no going back. Dongwu was already making notes about the modifications they would need. Captain, give me 2 weeks and I can turn the Taegek into something that can hurt them, but we will only get one chance at this. As the meeting broke up and his crew went back to their preparations, Jiho stood alone in the conference room staring at the star charts. One small human ship against an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. The odds were impossible, but sometimes impossible was exactly what the situation required. Captain Jiho pressed his face against the cold metal wall of his small quarters aboard the human exploration ship. Taegek, the stars outside his tiny window looked the same as they had for the past 6 months, but he knew they were getting close to something new, something that might change everything for humanity. The ship hummed quietly around him as his crew worked through their daily routines. They were explorers, not warriors sent out from Earth to map new star systems and hopefully find friendly alien civilizations to talk with. Nobody expected trouble from this mission. They carried scientific equipment and communication devices, but their weapons were just basic defensive systems. A soft knock on his door made Jiho turn away. From the window, his navigator Minji stepped inside carrying a datapad in her small hands. Her dark eyes were bright with excitement as she showed him the readings they had been collecting. Captain, we are about to drop out of hyperspace near the Target system, she said. The long-range scanners are picking up something really strange. There are way too many ships in one place for a normal trading route or military patrol. Jiho followed her to the bridge where the rest of his senior crew was. Already working, Chief Engineer Dongwu sat at his station, checking all the ship systems to make sure everything was running perfectly. His thick fingers moved quickly over the controls as he monitored the engines and power systems communications. Officer Hyeji looked up from her console with a worried expression on her face. Captain, I am getting some really weird signals from up ahead. They do not sound like normal radio chatter between ships. It sounds more like people praying or begging. For something, the bridge fell quiet as everyone processed this information. Jiho had been expecting to find maybe a few alien ships or perhaps a small space station. Instead, they seemed to be approaching something much bigger and possibly much more dangerous. Prepare to drop out of hyperspace, he ordered. All stations report ready. The stars outside suddenly stopped moving as the Taiguk returned to normal space. What they saw made the entire crew stare in shock. The space around a beautiful blue planet was filled with thousands of identical ships. Each one was massive and golden-colored like floating temples that caught and reflected the light of the nearby star. The planet itself was covered with huge cities that sprawled across entire continents, but something felt wrong about the whole scene. The golden ships hung in perfect formations above the world, like they were watching everything that happened down below. Heiji worked frantically at her station, trying to decode the signals coming from the planet. Captain, these are definitely not normal ship-to-ship communications. The people down there are calling the golden ships divine vessels and begging for mercy from their immortal master. Stangwu pulled up tactical readings on his screen. Those ships are huge, Captain. Each one is at least 10 times bigger than our vessel, and there are thousands of them. If they are hostile, we would not stand a chance in a fight. Jiho made a quick decision that probably saved all their lives. Take us behind that asteroid field over there and engage stealth systems. I want to watch what happens here before we make contact with anyone. The Taiguk slipped quietly behind a cluster of large space rocks and activated its hiding technology. The crew watched through their sensors as one of the golden ships slowly descended toward the planet's surface. It moved like it was floating on invisible currents of air rather than using normal engines. Through their powerful telescopes, they could see beings emerging from the landed ship. These creatures looked almost like humans, but their skin glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to come from inside their bodies. Their movements were graceful and confident, like they owned everything. They looked at the planet. Inhabitants who looked like purple-skinned humanoids with 4 arms came running from their cities. When they saw the glowing beings, they immediately fell to their knees and pressed their faces to the ground in worship. They offered baskets of food, precious metals, and beautiful artwork as tribute to their visitors. The glowing beings took whatever they wanted without showing any emotion or gratitude. They pointed at different items, and the purple creatures scrambled to load them onto floating platforms that carried the goods back to the golden ship. When they were finished taking what they wanted, the glowing beings simply walked back to their ship and flew away. Minji whispered so quietly that Jiho could barely hear her. Captain, those people down there really think those beings are actual gods. They are not just showing respect or following orders. They honestly believe they are in the presence of divine creatures. Jia felt his stomach turn as he began to understand what they were witnessing. This was not peaceful first contact between civilizations. This was something much worse. The glowing beings were using their advanced technology to convince primitive worlds that they were gods. Then they were exploiting those worlds for tribute and worship. The crew spent the next several hours watching the same terrible pattern repeat itself. The golden ships would visit different parts of the planet, and the local inhabitants would rush out to worship them and offer tribute. The glowing beings took whatever they wanted and left behind populations who seemed grateful to have been robbed. Jeji discovered that the pattern extended far beyond just this one world. Her communication equipment was picking up similar signals from dozens of nearby star systems. Everywhere the same golden ships and the same worship and tribute. Dongwu found something even more disturbing in the long-range sensor data. Captain, I am tracking the movement patterns of these golden ships. They have been systematically visiting every inhabited world in this entire region of space. And according to these readings, they are slowly expanding their territory. The engineer pulled up a star map that showed the expansion pattern of the golden ships over the past several decades. They moved like a slow wave across the galaxy, conquering one star system after another. Every world they visited became part of their empire of false worship. But what made Jiho's blood run cold was the direction of their expansion. The golden ships were moving toward the part of space where Earth was located. At their current rate of expansion, they would reach human territory within 50 years, maybe less. We have to get back and warn everyone, Minji said as she stared at the star map. Earth needs to know what is coming this way. But Hyeji had been listening carefully to the communications between the golden ship's captain. I do not think 50 years will be enough time. The beings on those ships already know about Earth. They have detected our radio signals, and they are planning to add humanity to their collection of worshipping species. The bridge fell silent again as everyone realized the terrible situation they were in. They had stumbled across an empire of false gods who had been enslaving civilizations for thousands of years. And now those same false gods were planning to come to Earth and turn humanity into another species of worshippers. Zeho looked around at his small crew, knowing that the next decision he made might determine the fate of every human being who had ever lived. They could try to run back to Earth and hope that 50 years would be enough time to build a defense against an enemy with vastly superior technology, or they could try to do something about the situation right here and right now with just one small exploration ship against an empire that controlled hundreds of worlds. The golden ships continued their slow dance around the blue planet below, completely unaware that 4 humans were watching them and planning something that would shake their empire to its very foundations.